Hi guys. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I had mentioned at the end of yesterday's video, and that's the pressure that we're often under to hide or ignore, or in some cases even completely eradicate certain aspects of our humanness. And largely because those aspects are deemed inconvenient or weak or unpleasant or uncomfortable for us or for other people. Now, I'm not going to suggest that we should give in to every single whim that we have. Obviously, that would have dangerous implications. I am also not suggesting that it's healthy to stay stuck in one emotional state indefinitely, nor do I condone maliciously attacking other people because it's how we feel at the time. But I do want to I want to stress the importance of self-awareness and self-acceptance, because that's how we ultimately learn to, build on our strengths and mitigate our weaknesses, which is something I often talk about. I once read in a book that the definition of a realist is somebody who accepts things as they are in order to make them better. And that's always stuck with me, and that's how I view myself. And everything that I'm, dealing with and I'm struggling with, when those things come up, I always try to remember, okay, this is not something for me to ignore or sweep under the rug or try to cover up. This is something for me to be aware of, to accept myself as I am in order to make things better. Because if I don't recognize what I'm struggling with, if I don't get to the root causes, if I don't acknowledge that I'm having problems, then it's going to be real hard for me to figure out solutions, to see how I can work with that, to see how I can move further into self-acceptance and into self-love. And ultimately, if we really want to move into complete self-acceptance, we do have to accept the parts of ourselves that we are uncomfortable with, that do cause us to struggle a little bit, or a lot. But we're not really encouraged to do that in our society. And that's why I want to talk about this, because some of it's blatant, bullying because you're different. Some of it, though, a lot of it is really subliminal messaging. How often do we hear phrases like, well, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or think positive? How often do we hear those things? And I'm not saying that those things don't have merit, because they do. They have their time and place. But we lose a lot when we don't really look at ourselves through a clear lens, when we don't really see ourselves as we are as whole beings, when we don't allow others to see us as whole beings. And that's something that often gets overlooked by society. And I think that's in large part because, we are social creatures, and we do, live side by side with each other in most situations. We are pack animals, and every pack has its rules, right? So from the time we're born until the time we die, we're told, the way that we should act, the things that we should do, what the steps are for how to live your life, that sort of thing. And anytime we don't fit into that perfectly, anytime that we veer away from that, anytime that we make other people uncomfortable by being different, we get labeled very easily as being broken, or as being wrong, or as being scary or crazy, or whatever derogatory term you can think of, to denote somebody who is basically just out of the social norm. Now, we have rules in society for a reason. They do serve a purpose. There is merit to them. Everything in balance and moderation, right? But a lot of times we take things too far. Humans have that in them. They naturally tend to just take things to one extreme or the other. And that's often what happens. So I first noticed it in the psychiatric industry, which is something that I have been exposed to from the very beginning of my life. My father had his PhD in psychology, had his own private practice. My sister was going through school to get her master's in psychology when I was growing up. My mom used to be a nurse working in a geriatric unit in a mental hospital. She also had borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. My sister is on the autism spectrum. I have bipolar disorder and I'm on the autism spectrum. So I've been exposed to the psychiatric industry my entire life. And I've always loved psychology. It was my first love, and I thought when I was growing up, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get my doctorate in psychology, I'm going to have my own practice, I'm going to be part of this, I want to help people, right? But as I grew older, the more that I saw, the more that I experienced, the more that I really got to see more and be involved more in the inner workings of the psychiatric industry, the more I decided I don't want to follow that career path. And it wasn't because I didn't want to help people anymore. It was because I started to see that as a whole, the psychiatric industry is more interested in making people fit into the social scripts. So there are doctors and therapists and practitioners in general who genuinely want to help their patients to, get out of their depressive slump or to calm their anxiety. There are practitioners who genuinely want to help you to work through past traumas and to learn behavioral techniques and all that good stuff. So I'm not saying that everybody in the psychiatric industry is horrible, but as a whole, the psychiatric industry is more dedicated to how do we make you normal? How do we make you fit? How do we make you a productive member of society? And we see a lot with over-medication, or a lot of people end up on a cocktail of psych meds. And a lot of those meds have more side effects than anything. And a lot of times people get lost in the psychiatric industry. They go for help and they end up with a ton of pills and not a whole lot else. And there's not a whole lot of support within the industry, because it is still part of the medical industry, to look at things like nutrition, to look at spirituality. You can get kind of into that with mindfulness techniques, which moves into behavioral therapies and that sort of thing, but there's not a whole lot of focus on holistic care. There's not a whole lot of focus on let's help you to become more self-aware. Let's help you to see who you really are as a whole being. Let's help you to figure out what your strengths are, figure out where your vulnerabilities are, and how to balance those things, how to find real fulfillment in your life, how to really be happy. Most of the psychiatric field is focused on how do we make you fit? How do we make you comply? And maybe that sounds a little extreme and a little conspiracy theorist. If you disagree with me, then you disagree with me, but that's been my personal experience. And I've watched that in family members and friends and in my father's patients. I've experienced that myself when, I was having in the past really bad depression, and they always wanted to give me an antidepressant. Here, take this. But that doesn't do anything. In fact, I feel worse on the antidepressants. Well, yeah, but you can work now, right? Well, yeah, I can go to work, but I'm still miserable all the time. Doesn't that matter? And generally speaking, overall, the answer is no, not really. Because if the antidepressants make it possible for me to work, then I'm a functioning member of society. My behavior's fine. I don't need to worry about anything else. But I would still feel miserable. And I saw that with my mom a lot, and I've seen that with a lot of people in my life as well. And, the side effects from one medication, oh, we'll just give you another medication to counteract that. But they don't really get to the source of what's going on. And even a lot of times when they try to, they're still treating you like you're sick, like you're crazy. When, no, you're different. And, there are times when we feel crazy, for sure. When I'm in a mixed episode of my bipolar, I feel really crazy. And I get pretty close to having a psychotic break. There are extremes that, you do have to be aware of, that you need to address, and everybody's different in terms of their neurochemistry. And I'm not saying that all psychiatric medication is a horrible idea. It works for some people. But still, whether you take meds or not, there needs to be more of a focus on looking at who we actually are and being more accepting of ourselves. And when I say accepting, I don't mean to say, oh, well, I'm a violent person, but I accept myself, so I'm just going to keep being violent. No. When I say self-acceptance, I mean looking at who we are and saying, okay, I have violent urges. That is something that I don't want to act on, or that is really not okay for me to act on. But there's also these other things about me that are good. So how do I really amplify those good things, and how do I mellow out those violent tendencies? How do I address the root issue? What's causing me to have those violent tendencies? Is it a trauma? Is it that I am especially prone to stress? Like people who are on autism spectrum, a lot of times they have very limited capacity to deal with sensory input. So like for me, I have a lot of sensitivity to sound. And when I'm in some place that's crowded and there's a lot of noise around me, especially if I'm expected to focus on something or concentrate, I become internally like I'm going to explode. I feel very violent. I want to kill people because I am so overloaded by all of the sensory input. Do I ever act on that? Obviously, no. But I am aware that I have that. I am aware of the root cause, and that allows me to figure out ways that I can work with it. That's really what I'm focusing on here. It's not self-acceptance in terms of just, well, this is who I am and I don't know any other way, so I'm just going to continue being like this and acting on these things that aren't healthy for me or for other people. It's more about being able to be self-aware so that you can really see yourself, and so you can look at these are my good qualities. These are the things I really like about myself. These are the things that I really want to amplify. These are the qualities about myself that cause me to struggle, that make me uncomfortable. They're things that, you know, I don't want to act on. So how do you balance those things out? How can you appreciate both aspects of yourself? How do you find that balance point where it's like, okay, so I have this, you know, sensory overload issue, but I have this strength over here, and I can use that to balance myself out. I can use this behavioral technique or this mindfulness technique that I've learned that I'm really good at to mitigate any potential damage that might be caused by the sensory overload issue that I have. So that's really what I'm talking about here. But the psychiatric community as a whole looks more at just how do we make you normal? Not how do you feel? How do you experience life? Do you feel fulfilled? Are you depressed? Are you anxious? It's more about, well, how do we just make you fit better? I personally don't feel like it's a success if you're just numb, if you've lost yourself, if you feel like a shell of yourself, if you don't really know yourself, if you have a difficult time forming meaningful attachments to other people because you've become so numbed out, that is not a success. It doesn't matter if you can go to a job and work. It doesn't matter if you no longer have, you know, temper tantrums. If you are not really living a life that's fulfilled, if you're not living in such a way that you can really love yourself, if you're not living in a way where you can have meaningful connections to other people, and that's what you want, then something's missing. And we can't figure out what that missing part is if we just cover up the symptoms. Now, the spiritual community has a lot more freedom. They do. There's a lot more freedom in the spiritual community because a lot of us in the spiritual community were bullied, or have been bullied, or still are being bullied because we're different. A lot of us have had trauma. A lot of us have gifts and abilities that set us apart from, you know, the normal population. There is a lot more acceptance within the spiritual community for people who are different. It is kind of a sanctuary for a lot of us. However, still following, you know, there's social constructs of just being human. Culture aside, all of that stuff aside, just being human, we do fall into the pack mentality still, and we do have these rules and all of that are still there, but it's more subliminal in the spiritual community. One of the most common things that I see is people using things like the law of attractions to, you know, basically say, well, you know, I'm feeling sad right now, or I'm feeling really depressed right now, I'm really anxious right now, so I'm just going to focus on what I want to be and what I want to have, and that'll fix it. There is some merit there. Positive thinking is a thing. It is. But it's not a cure-all. It doesn't fix everything. There have been lots of times when I've been really depressed. I'm like, I'm going to pretend that I'm happy because that's what I want to be. And I can play the part really well. I can play the part, but I don't feel happy. And some of that is because there are a lot of times there are genuine things going on with your physiology, or there's really stressful things in your life that you don't have control over. And it's okay for us to say, you know, I'm struggling. I'm having a hard time right now. It's okay for us to have moments where we're like, you know, I'm pissed at the universe because I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why I feel this way. I don't understand why all of these things are happening around me. It's not good to stay stuck in that. But it's okay to have those moments where we crash out a little bit and we accept, you know, I'm human and this is hard and it hurts. But a lot of times what I do see, and there is more support in the spiritual community for people who are different. Again, I do want to emphasize that. I'm not trying to attack anyone. But I still see a lot of that attitude of, you know, well, use positive thinking. That'll fix it. Or another thing that I frequently see is, well, we're just transmuting things for the collective. I have my own theories and ideas on that, but regardless of whether you are or not transmuting things for the collective, there are still moments when the pain that you have is genuinely your own and it's personal pain. And a lot of times I feel like even in the spiritual community that gets overlooked, or it gets tucked away, or it gets covered up somehow, or it gets explained away. And another thing that I have seen, and I especially see this with anybody who is in a position where they are a teacher or a leader, not a huge fan of those terms, but there is an insane amount of pressure to be love and light all the time. And I've faced some issues with that myself, because I do try to be open and honest about where I'm at. And if you follow me on Facebook, you know, a lot of times you get to see, like, I'm having a shit day today, you know. And I've had people who have approached me, you know, privately, who are like, you know, you really shouldn't do things like that. You shouldn't vent like that because people look to you as an example. I get where you're coming from with that. But it's even more important, I think, personally, it's even more important for teachers and leaders, or whatever you want to call it, to be honest about the fact that we are still human. Yes, we are divine beings, but we are also human, and we're meant to be. That's why we're having this experience. That's why we are divine beings living a mortal life. Because we are one of the biggest challenges and the greatest areas for growth and evolution as a being comes from us striking that balance between the divine and the human. That is, I think, and obviously my perspective is skewed by this because I am living a human experience right now, so maybe there are greater growing experiences that I'm not aware of. But to me, I can't really think of any greater growth for a soul than to have the struggles of being human while still trying to stay connected to who you are as a divine being. If we just try to ignore that humanness completely, if we just try to eradicate it, if we try to pretend like it doesn't exist, if we try to cover it up, if we try to not be human while we're living a human life, to me, I feel like we're really missing out on the lessons. We're missing out on a lot of the blessings, because being human, it ain't all bad. There are a lot of really positive things about the human experience. You know, we do get to feel unique forms of joy. We get to feel, you know, the joys of sex. We get to feel the joys of having a human body and how we can interact with our environment that way, and the mysteries of how the brain works and the body works, and these areas of exploration. That's part of the human experience too, and it's beautiful and it's amazing, and I love that. But we can't just take the good and say, well, you know, I don't want to pay attention to any of the other stuff. I'll just use law of attractions. That stuff doesn't exist. Only the good stuff exists. We're missing out when we do that. That is my personal opinion. Obviously, live however feels right for you. But I talk about this because I do want to bring attention to the fact that we are human, and it's not a bad thing. It's okay to be human. It's totally okay to be a human being, to have days that aren't so great, to be pissed at the universe from time to time, to have sensory overload, to be depressed, to be anxious, to have a panic attack. It's totally okay to have those things from time to time. Again, not saying to stay stuck in that forever, not saying to use that as a way to justify malicious behavior that's damaging to other people or to ourselves. But there's so much that we can learn about ourselves, about other people, about the human experience, about the universe, if we really do move further into that self-awareness, if we really see ourselves completely as we are and learn to find the humor in it, to accept ourselves and to accept other people, the more connected we are able to be to our own experience, the more compassion we can have for other people, the more we develop that sense of empathy for others, which allows us to be more present for others, to have more meaningful connections with people, to have more meaningful connections with the world around us in general. My biggest problem with this idea that we need to cover up or hide or get rid of parts of our humanness is that we miss out on so much by doing that. Again, that's my personal opinion, but if I had the opportunity to get rid of my bipolar disorder forever, maybe if I'm having a really bad crash, I would say, yeah, I want it gone forever, because I do have those moments where I just drop to the floor and I'm sobbing and screaming and crying and just begging. I just want this to stop. I just want to stop feeling this way because it's so miserable. I do have those moments. And in those moments, maybe I would say, you know, yeah, I don't want to ever feel this again. But most of the time, I can look at the experiences that I've had with it, and I would say, you know, I wouldn't trade it. Because even though it has been, and at times still continues to be, so hard to live with, I wouldn't trade it, because I have gained so much from it. I have learned so much about myself, about the world around me, about psychology, about neurochemistry, about nutrition. I have learned so much, and I have developed so much more compassion for other people and what they struggle with and what they're experiencing. It has completely changed how I view everything. And I feel that for the most part, that's been in a very positive way, because I've chosen to make it positive. And that's what we need to look at, is it's, how do we take this thing that just seems like a shit situation and make it something worthwhile? It's not always going to feel good, but how do I take those moments that don't feel good and make them worthwhile? How do I utilize those? How do I focus in on those things in such a way that allows me to really see myself, that allows me to love myself regardless of what weaknesses I have and what vulnerabilities I have? How do I tap into that self-awareness to express myself through art or through my relationships with other people? How do I make the most of everything that I am? Because if I'm only looking at the parts of myself that I like, then I am not making the most of everything that I am. Again, personal opinion, that's how I feel. But if given the chance to not be bipolar, to have that removed, I wouldn't take it. Because even the most miserable moments, they give me something worthwhile. They give me that opportunity for growth that I wouldn't otherwise have. Same thing with my trauma that I experienced as a child. Same thing with the sexual abuse that I've experienced as an adult. Same thing with everything that I've dealt with, the autism, the bipolar, the Marfan syndrome that I have that affects all of my connective tissue and is messing with my joints and my heart and all of that. Every experience that I've had ultimately leads me further into self-discovery, into self-mastery, into a greater sense of wonder about everything that is life. So that's my piece on that. I will probably talk about this again in some ways in the future, but I really wanted to emphasize it and make a video completely dedicated to it because it is so important to me. There's so much to be gained from really accepting everything that we are. And there's, like I said, it's not always fun, it's not always pleasant, but there is a sense of accomplishment that I get every time I figure out, okay, this is one of my triggers. Well, now I just won't do that thing. I won't eat a ton of sugar, and then I'm not going to have this trigger. Every time that I discover something new, that's exciting for me. That gives me an opportunity for growth. That gives me a sense of accomplishment because I've learned something new about myself. I've learned something new that I can use to help other people. I've learned something that allows me to make the most of my life, to really understand myself. And to me, that's amazing. You know, I remember when I was younger and when I was first really trying to come to terms with how bad my depression was getting and the suicidal ideation, all the anxiety and even hallucinations that I used to have because of how intense everything got. I look back at that and yeah, it was absolutely miserable, but everything that I've learned as a result of those things has given me, it's given me so much. That doesn't mean that I'm not pissed off sometimes about it, because I am, and it doesn't mean that there aren't times when I just want it to stop. There are times when I tell people a lot, like, it's not that I want to die, it's that I want to not exist for a little bit because I just need a break. There are times that I have that, but it pushes me to my limits, and it pushes me to grow, and I try to always focus on that. But ignoring that aspect of myself, trying to cover it up with medication or with just positive thinking, trying to force myself to fit into social scripts, it doesn't really work. And even when I can play the part, there's still so much that's missing. And some of my most meaningful relationships that I've had with people have come from me just being honest, or them just being honest about where they're at. From those moments when somebody asks you how your day is, and you're having a really bad day, and instead of you saying, you know what, I'm good, you know, I'm putting on the smile even if it's not really authentic, and then instead deciding, you know what, I'm just going to be honest, I'm having a really hard time. And that could start a conversation. Well, what's going on? Well, my mom just died. And then you can start developing a connection with somebody based on those things. So much gets lost if we ignore or cover up the totality of who we are. So much gets lost when we just put on a front and we don't really let ourselves be seen. Now, there are situations where, yeah, it's necessary for us to play a part. You know, a lot of times in professional capacities, I've referred to it as my flight attendant persona, where I put on the smile and I have a certain tone in my voice, even if I'm having a rough day. There are times when that is necessary. I'm not going to say that there's not. Like I said earlier in the video, I'm not trying to suggest that we should give in to every single win that we have. But it does us no good to try to ignore completely or cover up completely when we're struggling, when we're having a hard time with something, to try to eradicate aspects of ourselves that are inconvenient. It is inconvenient to have the issues that I have. When I'm in a mixed state, or even when I'm depressed, I can lose an entire day and I feel like I got nothing done. I feel like I accomplished nothing that I wanted to, because I can be so scattered or I can be so drained that I just don't do anything. I don't have the motivation for it, or I can't focus on it. There are days when it feels like wasted time, but it's never really wasted time, because there's always that opportunity for growth. There's always the opportunity for us to learn something from it. And if we don't take those opportunities, if we resent those aspects of ourselves, then we're backtracking, we're missing out on things. We're moving further away from self-acceptance and self-awareness. I guess that's really all I have. And sorry I went off on kind of a tangent there, but this is just something that's always been so important to me, that there is so much to be gained by really honestly looking at ourselves and seeing everything that we are, our complete and utter totality, our humanness, our divinity, our strengths, our vulnerabilities, looking at all of it, integrating it all, and saying, you know what, I am an amazing person because I am able to be all of these things, and I'm able to do so much with that. I'm able to experience things so much more acutely and intensely. The good things, the bad things, all of it. I'm able to have these experiences because I am human, because I am living this existence as a divine being in a mortal body. I am able to have experiences I would not normally be able to have. I'm able to explore and discover. I am able to move so far into self-mastery, into self-awareness, and to have all of these meaningful connections to other people and animals and the world around me and the universe because of this experience that I'm having. I am able to appreciate the good because I know what it's like to struggle. I don't take things for granted because I know what it's like when things suck. That's the beauty of the experience. And I really want to help, and maybe this is selfish, but I want to help people get to that point where they're able to see and accept themselves and see and accept other people for who they are as whole beings, and to see the mystery and the wonder and the excitement and all of the incredible things that there are to see by having a full experience. That's ultimately what I want to help people do, because I just don't see the merit in completely covering these things about ourselves, in hiding them away as though it's something to be ashamed of, in giving into the stigma of being different as though that's something bad. There's something amazing about all of us, but we miss out on that, and other people miss out on that when we try to hide or eradicate any aspect of who we are. So that's what I've got. Yeah, I will see you guys next time.